What if that restlessness you feel in your chest isn't anxiety at all, but something deeper trying to get your attention? So many people are walking around right now with a quiet, persistent unease they can't fully explain. It's not panic. It's not racing thoughts. It doesn't always come with fear or a clear trigger. It shows up in still moments. Late at night. In the pause between tasks. In that subtle pressure that says, something isn't right, even when life looks fine on the surface. And the moment you try to explain it, the easiest label appears: anxiety. But what if that label is incomplete? We live in a time where almost every inner discomfort gets categorized, medicated, or silenced as quickly as possible. And while anxiety is real and serious, and deserves care, there's another experience many people are having that doesn't fit neatly into that box. It's a kind of inner agitation that doesn't feel chaotic, but alert. Not overwhelming, but persistent. Not screaming, but whispering. A sense of urgency without panic. A feeling of misalignment rather than fear. Across cultures and belief systems, people are describing the same thing in different words: restlessness, unease, heaviness, alertness, pressure. And what's interesting is that this feeling often intensifies when life slows down, not when it speeds up. Distraction helps temporarily. Silence makes it louder. Noise numbs it. Truth sharpens it. That alone tells us something important. In this season of global uncertainty, spiritual tension, and emotional overload, it's easy to assume every inner signal means something is wrong with you. But what if this restlessness isn't a malfunction? What if it's a signal? Throughout history, and especially in Scripture, there are moments when people felt unsettled not because they were broken, but because they were becoming aware. Moments when comfort faded, not to punish, but to awaken. When the heart grew uneasy because it was no longer willing to ignore misalignment. The Bible speaks often about the heart, not just as emotion, but as perception. As an inner compass. As the place where truth, conscience, and direction quietly intersect. And when something in life drifts out of alignment, values, purpose, relationships, priorities, the heart doesn't always respond with fear. Sometimes it responds with unrest. A holy discomfort. A sense that continuing as usual is no longer an option. That idea challenges us, because we're taught to treat restlessness as something to eliminate, not interpret. To suppress instead of examine. But suppression doesn't bring peace, it brings confusion. And confusion is exactly what so many are feeling right now. Not knowing whether to push forward, pull back, change direction, or simply endure. Feeling on edge, without understanding why. This is why so many people feel misunderstood when they say, "I don't feel anxious, but I don't feel settled either." They know something is happening internally, but the language doesn't quite fit. And when language fails, people start doubting themselves. Wondering if they're weak. Overthinking. Broken. When in reality, they may be responding appropriately to something deeper unfolding beneath the surface. If any of this feels familiar, that's not coincidence. It suggests you're sensing something many others are sensing too. And before we try to quiet that feeling, label it, or push it away, there's something important we need to understand first. Because not all inner unrest comes from fear. Some of it comes from awareness. And learning to tell the difference changes everything that comes next. Before we go any further, let me pause here for a moment. Because if any part of what you just heard felt uncomfortably accurate, that matters more than you might realize. If you've ever felt this kind of restlessness in your heart, this quiet inner tension that doesn't feel like fear, but doesn't let you stay comfortable either, take a second and leave a like on this video. Not as a routine click, but as a signal. It helps this message reach others who are carrying the same feeling silently, wondering if they're the only ones sensing it. I also want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me honestly, have you felt this kind of inner unrest too? Maybe you don't have the right words for it. Maybe it comes and goes. Maybe it shows up in moments of silence, reflection, or exhaustion. Even a short comment like, yes, or one word that describes how it feels for you, is enough. Your comment isn't just engagement, it becomes part of a shared awareness that this experience is real and recognized. And if content like this resonates with you, content that explores inner unrest, spiritual awareness, discernment, and the deeper meaning behind what we feel, consider subscribing to the channel. Not just so you don't miss future videos, but because what we're doing here isn't about quick answers. It's about understanding what's happening beneath the surface, step by step, without dismissing what your heart is trying to communicate. Your like, your comment, your subscription. They all tell me this conversation matters. That it's not just being watched, but felt. And that's important, because now that we've acknowledged this restlessness, the next step is crucial. We need to understand why this kind of unrest appears, how it's different from anxiety, and what it's actually pointing toward. Because once you see the difference clearly, you'll never interpret that feeling the same way again. Before we go any further, let me pause here for a moment. Because if any part of what you just heard felt uncomfortably accurate, that matters more than you might realize. If you've ever felt this kind of restlessness in your heart, this quiet inner tension that doesn't feel like fear, but doesn't let you stay comfortable either, take a second and leave a like on this video. Not as a routine click, but as a signal. It helps this message reach others who are carrying the same feeling silently, wondering if they're the only ones sensing it. I also want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me honestly, have you felt this kind of inner unrest too? Maybe you don't have the right words for it. Maybe it comes and goes. Maybe it shows up in moments of silence, reflection, or exhaustion. Even a short comment like, yes, or one word that describes how it feels for you, is enough. Your comment isn't just engagement, it becomes part of a shared awareness that this experience is real and recognized. And if content like this resonates with you, content that explores inner unrest, spiritual awareness, discernment, and the deeper meaning behind what we feel, consider subscribing to the channel. Not just so you don't miss future videos, but because what we're doing here isn't about quick answers. It's about understanding what's happening beneath the surface, step by step, without dismissing what your heart is trying to communicate. Your like, your comment, your subscription. They all tell me this conversation matters. That it's not just being watched, but felt. And that's important, because now that we've acknowledged this restlessness, the next step is crucial. We need to understand why this kind of unrest appears, how it's different from anxiety, and what it's actually pointing toward. Because once you see the difference clearly, you'll never interpret that feeling the same way again. There's a reason this restlessness doesn't behave like anxiety. Anxiety usually comes with noise, racing thoughts, imagined futures, catastrophic scenarios looping without rest. It pulls the mind forward into fear. What you're feeling is different. It doesn't rush you into panic. It pulls you inward. It shows up when things are quiet, when distractions fade, when you finally stop moving and realize something inside you has been trying to speak for a long time. Many people describe it as a weight, but not a crushing one. More like pressure, a subtle insistence, a feeling that something is unfinished, unresolved, or misaligned. And the strangest part is that it often appears when life seems fine. No obvious crisis. No immediate danger. No clear reason for distress. That's why it's so confusing. You start questioning yourself, telling yourself you should be calm. You compare your life to others and feel guilty for not being at peace. But guilt only deepens the unrest, because it treats the signal as a flaw instead of information. This is where so many people go wrong. They assume every inner discomfort is a problem to eliminate. But not every signal is a symptom. Some are indicators. In Scripture, unease of the heart is often portrayed not as weakness, but as awareness. As conscience waking up. As discernment sharpening. As the inner life recognizing that something in the outer life no longer fits the same way it used to. Think about how often this restlessness increases when you ignore it. When you keep pushing forward on autopilot. When you stay in situations that drain you. When you postpone decisions you already know you need to face. That's not how anxiety works. Anxiety usually intensifies with overthinking. This kind of unrest intensifies with avoidance. It quiets when you're honest. It sharpens when you pretend nothing's wrong. The Bible consistently describes the heart as more than emotion. It's described as the center of perception, intention, and alignment. When Jesus spoke about being troubled in spirit, it wasn't panic, it was awareness of what was unfolding. When prophets felt burdened, it wasn't anxiety, it was clarity paired with responsibility. That doesn't mean every restless feeling is spiritual or profound. But it does mean we shouldn't dismiss all inner unease as disorder. Another important distinction is direction. Anxiety scatters. It pulls you in every direction at once. This restlessness has direction, even if it's subtle. It points towards something specific, a truth you've been avoiding, a change you've been resisting, a misalignment you've normalized, a calling you've postponed. You may not know exactly what it is yet, but you can feel that the feeling itself is asking for attention, not escape. This is why silence feels uncomfortable right now for so many people. Not because silence is dangerous, but because it removes distraction. And once distraction is gone, the heart gets louder. That's when the unrest surfaces. Not as chaos, but as clarity trying to form. People often say, "I feel unsettled for no reason." But there is a reason, it just hasn't reached the mind yet. We're living in a season where many people are experiencing this simultaneously. A time of exposure, transition, and inner reckoning. Old structures no longer feel secure. Old identities feel too small. Old explanations don't satisfy. In moments like this, the heart reacts before language catches up. It senses misalignment before the mind can name it. That's not dysfunction. That's perception. What makes this especially hard is that this kind of unrest doesn't come with immediate answers. It comes with questions. And questions are uncomfortable because they slow us down. They force us to look inward instead of outward. To examine instead of distract. To feel instead of numb. That's why so many people instinctively want to label this feeling as anxiety. Because anxiety implies treatment and relief. Awareness implies responsibility and change. And here's the part that matters most. This restlessness doesn't mean something bad is about to happen. It means something needs to happen. Not externally yet, but internally. A shift. A decision. A realignment. The heart rarely becomes unsettled without purpose. It becomes unsettled when continuing as you are is no longer sustainable. If, while listening, a specific word keeps surfacing in your mind, truth, alignment, clarity, calling, change, hold on to it. You don't need to explain it yet. Just notice it. Sometimes naming what's stirring inside you helps bring the feeling into focus instead of letting it stay vague and heavy. Because once we understand that this restlessness isn't random and isn't simply anxiety, the next question becomes unavoidable. How do you actually tell the difference, and what happens when you ignore one for the other? When we don't understand what kind of inner signal we're dealing with, we almost always respond the wrong way. That's where confusion begins to grow. Many people sense this unrest and immediately go into fix mode. They search for ways to silence it. They distract themselves. They try to calm it down as quickly as possible. And when it doesn't go away, they assume something is wrong with them. But the problem isn't the feeling itself, it's the interpretation. Anxiety and this kind of heart-level inquietude may feel similar on the surface, but they move in opposite directions internally. Anxiety pulls you into imagined futures. It feeds on what-ifs. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose control? What if I can't handle what's coming? It accelerates the mind and narrows perception. This other kind of unrest doesn't rush you forward. It slows you down. It draws your attention inward. Instead of flooding you with scenarios, it quietly repeats the same pressure until you finally stop and listen. That's why treating everything as anxiety can actually deepen the discomfort. When you try to calm what is actually calling for attention, the heart feels ignored. And when the heart is ignored, it doesn't scream louder, it grows heavier. People often say, "I tried relaxing, but it didn't help," or "I tried distracting myself, but it came back stronger." That's a clue. Anxiety often eases with reassurance and grounding. This unrest often intensifies when you try to bypass it. Another difference is relationship to truth. Anxiety distorts reality. It exaggerates threats and minimizes strength. It convinces you that you are unsafe even when you are not. This restlessness doesn't distort, it exposes. It brings things into focus that you've been avoiding. Conversations you've been postponing. Decisions you've been delaying. Patterns you've normalized but know aren't sustainable. It's not trying to scare you. It's trying to align you. In Scripture, this distinction shows up repeatedly. There's fear that leads to paralysis, and there's fear, or unrest, that leads to wisdom. The Bible often says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," not because fear itself is holy, but because awareness of truth creates weight. Weight changes posture. It makes you stand differently. It makes you pay attention. That's the kind of unrest we're talking about here, the kind that carries gravity, not chaos. This is why so many people feel restless even when external life looks stable. The unrest isn't reacting to circumstances. It's responding to misalignment. You can have security and still feel unsettled. You can have routine and still feel off. Because the heart doesn't measure life by appearances. It measures by integrity. by whether what you're living matches what you know deep down. And here's where many people feel torn. On one hand, they don't want to over-spiritualize their emotions. On the other, they don't want to dismiss something that feels meaningful. That tension is valid. Discernment lives in the middle. It doesn't deny mental health, and it doesn't deny spiritual awareness. It asks a better question: what is this feeling producing in me? Anxiety produces confusion and shrinking. This unrest often produces clarity, even if it's uncomfortable. You may notice that when you sit honestly with this feeling, certain thoughts become clearer instead of more chaotic. You might feel a sense of, "I know what this is about, I just don't want to face it yet." That sentence alone is a powerful indicator. Anxiety clouds knowing. Awareness sharpens it. This is also why this unrest often comes in waves. Not constantly overwhelming, but persistent. It waits. It gives space. It returns when ignored. Almost like it's patient. That patience is important. It tells you the feeling isn't trying to dominate you. It's inviting you to respond. If, while listening, you've caught yourself thinking, "This doesn't feel like fear, it feels like something calling me to pay attention," that recognition matters. You don't need to resolve it yet. Just acknowledge it. Sometimes the most important step is realizing you're not fighting an enemy inside yourself, you're encountering a message. And once that difference becomes clearer, the next layer opens up naturally, because understanding what this unrest is leads to a deeper question. Why is it showing up now, in this season of your life, and not before? There's a reason this kind of inner unrest doesn't show up randomly. It tends to surface at specific moments, moments of transition, tension, or quiet awakening. When it arrives, it often catches people off guard because nothing dramatic has changed on the outside. Life may look the same. Responsibilities continue. Routines remain intact. And yet, internally, something has shifted. That timing matters more than most people realize. In Scripture, this pattern is consistent. Before major changes in direction, calling, or understanding, there is almost always a season of unease. Not panic. Not despair. But a disturbance that interrupts comfort. Moses felt it before leaving the wilderness. David felt it long before the throne. Jeremiah felt it before speaking a single word publicly. In each case, the unrest wasn't a reaction to danger, it was a preparation for clarity. This is where the modern misunderstanding becomes costly. We live in a culture that treats discomfort as a problem to eliminate as quickly as possible. If something feels heavy, we assume it's unhealthy. If something feels unsettling, we assume it's wrong. But the Bible doesn't treat all discomfort the same. Some discomfort is a warning. Some is refinement. Some is awakening. And learning the difference is essential. This heart-level inquietude often appears when what you're living no longer fits what you're becoming. Not because your life is bad, but because it's incomplete. The soul recognizes growth before the mind can articulate it. That gap creates pressure. You may feel it as dissatisfaction, restlessness, or a quiet sense that you're meant for something more aligned, not more impressive, not more visible, but more true. That's why this feeling often intensifies in silence. When noise fades, it becomes clearer. When distractions stop working, it gets louder. This isn't because silence is dangerous. It's because silence removes interference. And once interference is gone, truth has room to surface. Anxiety fears silence. This unrest seeks it. Another key marker is how this feeling interacts with purpose. Anxiety drains direction. It scatters energy. It makes everything feel urgent and meaningless at the same time. This unrest, even when uncomfortable, tends to narrow focus. It brings certain thoughts, questions, or convictions to the surface again and again. Not everything feels heavy, specific things do. That selectivity is not random. It's revealing. You might notice that this unrest points toward areas of your life where you've been postponing honesty. Not because you're weak, but because timing matters. Scripture shows that calling doesn't arrive fully formed. It arrives as tension first. As awareness. As discomfort with staying the same. The heart senses alignment before action becomes clear. This is also why this feeling often shows up when growth is unavoidable. When a season is ending. When an old version of you can no longer carry what's ahead. That transition rarely feels smooth. It feels disorienting. But disorientation isn't the same as danger. Sometimes it's simply the loss of familiar reference points before new ones are established. If you're listening to this and realizing that this unrest didn't appear during chaos, but during stillness, not during crisis, but during reflection, that detail matters. It suggests you're not being pulled apart. You're being repositioned. You don't need to rush to label it yet. You don't need to decide what it means today. But recognizing that this unrest often arrives before clarity, not after, changes how you relate to it. Instead of fighting it, you can begin to listen. And once you stop asking how to silence this feeling, the next question naturally emerges. What exactly is it trying to draw your attention toward, and what happens if you continue to ignore it? There's an important distinction the Bible makes that most people miss. Not every inner disturbance is meant to be resolved immediately. Some are meant to be held, lived with, examined slowly. This is where many people misinterpret what they're feeling, because we've been trained to believe that clarity should come first and discomfort second. Scripture reverses that order. Discomfort often comes first, precisely because it creates the conditions where clarity can eventually form. When this unrest is spiritual in nature, it doesn't rush you. It doesn't demand instant answers. Instead, it creates a tension between where you are and what you sense lies ahead. That tension is uncomfortable, but it's also purposeful. It prevents complacency. It keeps you from settling too quickly into explanations that soothe you but don't actually align you. Notice how this feeling behaves. It doesn't scream. It doesn't overwhelm you with racing thoughts. It sits quietly, returning at unexpected moments. Late at night, early in the morning, during ordinary tasks. It's persistent, but not chaotic. That persistence is one of the clearest signs that this isn't anxiety. Anxiety feeds on escalation. This unrest feeds on awareness. Scripture often describes this stage as being stirred. Not shaken apart, but stirred awake. Something within you is being disturbed because something within you is being invited to grow. Growth always disrupts equilibrium before it establishes new balance. Muscles ache before they strengthen. Vision blurs before it sharpens. The soul works the same way. This is why trying to medicate, distract, or silence this feeling prematurely can actually deepen confusion. Not because those tools are inherently wrong, but because they can interrupt a process that hasn't finished speaking yet. The goal isn't to stay uncomfortable forever. The goal is to let discomfort finish its work before you try to escape it. Another sign you're dealing with something deeper than anxiety is how this unrest affects your values. You may find yourself less tolerant of superficial answers, less satisfied with routines that once felt fine, more sensitive to what feels false, performative, or misaligned. This isn't negativity. It's discernment sharpening, the inner compass recalibrating. In Scripture, discernment rarely arrives as confidence. It arrives as unease with what no longer fits. That's why this stage feels awkward. You're outgrowing certain frameworks before new ones are fully formed. The old language doesn't work anymore, but the new language hasn't arrived yet. That gap can feel lonely, but it's not empty. It's transitional. You might also notice a quiet pull toward stillness rather than noise, toward reflection rather than reaction. Anxiety wants stimulation. It wants constant input. This unrest wants space. It wants room to surface what's been buried under routine and expectation. That desire for stillness isn't withdrawal, it's preparation. What's happening here isn't a breakdown of your inner world. It's a reordering. Something is being moved closer to the center. Something else is losing its grip. That internal shift often happens before external changes appear. Scripture shows this again and again. Inner realignment precedes outward movement. If you've ever wondered why this feeling doesn't go away even when life seems fine, this is why. It's not reacting to circumstances. It's responding to direction. And direction rarely announces itself loudly. It nudges. It unsettles. It waits to see whether you'll listen or drown it out. If a word keeps resurfacing for you as you listen, something like alignment, awakening, calling, or even clarity, take note of it. You don't need to explain it yet. You don't need to act on it yet. Simply noticing what resonates is often the first step toward understanding what this unrest is actually inviting you into. Because once this stirring is acknowledged instead of resisted, the next question becomes unavoidable. How do you tell the difference between a heart that's being awakened and a mind that's simply overwhelmed? If you feel led, you can share a single word in the comments that captures what this part stirred in you. Not a story, just a word. Sometimes naming it helps anchor it. There's a moment when this inner unrest shifts from being something you feel into something you begin to recognize. You start noticing patterns. Not just in yourself, but in how others are responding to the same pressures. Some people try to numb it. Others try to outrun it. And a few, often quietly, begin to listen. Scripture pays close attention to this moment, because it's where awareness turns into discernment. One of the clearest differences between spiritual unrest and anxiety is direction. Anxiety spins in circles. It multiplies questions without offering grounding. Spiritual unrest, on the other hand, slowly points somewhere. Not with a map, but with a pull. You may not know exactly where it's leading, but you can sense that it's not random. There's an internal gravity to it. A sense that staying exactly as you are is becoming harder than moving forward, even if forward feels unclear. This is why so many people say, "I don't know what's wrong, but I know something needs to change." That sentence alone reveals discernment beginning to wake up. Scripture shows that before any meaningful transformation, there is dissatisfaction with the familiar. Not hatred of life, not rejection of responsibility, but a growing awareness that what once sustained you no longer fully does. This stage can feel confusing because nothing external may have changed yet. Your routines might be the same. Your relationships intact. Your life functional. And yet internally, there's pressure. That pressure isn't accusing you. It's questioning you. It's asking whether you're living aligned with what you're becoming, or simply repeating what you've always known. The Bible often describes this as being called, but calling doesn't begin with clarity. It begins with restlessness. Moses felt it long before he understood it. David felt it while still in the fields. Jeremiah felt it before he ever spoke publicly. In each case, the unrest came first, not as fear, but as a quiet inability to remain fully comfortable with the status quo. Another important sign that this isn't anxiety is how it treats silence. Anxiety fears silence because silence amplifies worry. This unrest often seeks silence. It grows clearer when the noise fades. When distractions stop working. When explanations feel thin. That's not collapse, that's sensitivity increasing. The inner world tuning itself to something deeper than surface-level relief. You may notice that your reactions are changing. Things that once irritated you no longer do. Other things that once felt neutral now feel heavy. You're not becoming more emotional, you're becoming more selective. Discernment always narrows focus. It removes excess so what matters can stand out. Scripture shows that this narrowing isn't meant to isolate you. It's meant to prepare you. Before people are given direction, they're given clarity about what no longer fits. Before doors open, attachments loosen. This is uncomfortable because it happens without a schedule. You can't rush it. You can't force answers. You can only stay honest with what you're sensing. If you've been trying to fix this feeling and nothing works, consider this. Maybe it's not something to fix yet. Maybe it's something to understand. Something to walk with instead of fight. That doesn't mean surrendering to confusion. It means allowing discernment to mature before demanding resolution. As this awareness deepens, something else begins to happen. The unrest starts interacting with your choices. With how you spend time. With what you tolerate. With what you avoid. It stops being just a feeling and starts shaping posture. And that's where this journey becomes more personal. Because once unrest begins influencing direction, it quietly asks a harder question about what you're willing to let go of, and what you're being asked to step toward next. As this unrest begins to influence direction, it naturally brings resistance. Not always from the outside, but from within. There's a part of us that wants clarity without cost, growth without disruption, awakening without surrender. Scripture never presents transformation that way. It shows that when the heart is stirred, something else is stirred alongside it: attachment. To comfort. To identity. To versions of ourselves that once made sense, but no longer fully fit. This is where many people mislabel what they're experiencing as anxiety, because tension increases here. But notice the quality of that tension. It's not frantic. It's deliberate. It shows up when you're faced with choices that seem small on the surface but feel heavy internally. What you say yes to. What you keep postponing. What you continue tolerating even though it drains you. Anxiety overwhelms choice. This unrest sharpens it. Scripture often shows that before outward change, there is an inward pruning. Not dramatic. Not public. Quiet. Subtle. Certain habits lose their appeal. Certain conversations feel empty. Certain ambitions feel strangely hollow. This can feel like loss, but it's actually alignment shedding excess weight. You're not losing yourself, you're refining yourself. This is also why this stage feels emotionally vulnerable. When old anchors loosen and new ones haven't fully formed yet, you're between identities. Between who you've been and who you're becoming. That in-between space is uncomfortable, but it's sacred. Scripture consistently places formation there. Not in certainty, but in transition. You may notice that reassurance no longer satisfies you the way it used to. Encouraging words feel shallow if they don't align with truth. Positivity feels forced if it ignores what your heart is processing. That doesn't mean you're becoming pessimistic. It means you're becoming honest. Discernment values truth over comfort, even when truth takes longer to settle. Another sign you're in this stage is how sensitive you become to integrity, in yourself and in others. Misalignment stands out more clearly. Performative faith, borrowed confidence, surface-level answers begin to irritate you, even if you can't articulate why. That irritation isn't judgment. It's awareness refusing to go back to sleep. Scripture never rushes people through this phase, because rushing here creates instability later. Those who try to silence unrest too quickly often find it returning stronger. Not as punishment, but as persistence. What hasn't been acknowledged keeps knocking. What hasn't been listened to keeps resurfacing. If you felt torn between staying where you are and moving towards something you can't yet define, that tension is meaningful. It means you're listening. It means the unrest has moved from sensation into formation. And formation always asks for honesty before it offers direction. You don't need to make dramatic changes right now. You don't need to announce anything. What matters in this stage is attentiveness. Noticing what drains you. Noticing what steadies you. Noticing what pulls you closer to truth rather than away from it. These observations quietly shape the path ahead. Because as this inner pruning continues, something begins to settle beneath the discomfort, a deeper seriousness. A gravity. A sense that this isn't just about personal growth, but about readiness. And readiness introduces a new dimension to this unrest, one that Scripture treats with particular weight. That seriousness you begin to feel isn't heaviness for its own sake. It's weight with purpose. Scripture often associates this stage with readiness, not readiness as perfection, but readiness as orientation. You start sensing that this unrest isn't only about your inner life improving, it's about your inner life being prepared. Prepared for clarity. Prepared for responsibility. Prepared for moments when neutrality will no longer be an option. This is where the heart starts asking different questions. Not, how do I feel better, but, how do I stay aligned? Not, how do I make this stop, but, what is this shaping me for? Anxiety wants relief. Spiritual unrest wants readiness. That difference becomes unmistakable here. You may notice a shift in how you interpret challenges. Difficult moments no longer feel like interruptions, they feel instructional. Delays feel intentional. Silence feels meaningful. This doesn't mean everything suddenly makes sense. It means you're no longer treating discomfort as an enemy. You're treating it as information. Scripture shows that readiness develops before clarity, not after. People who were entrusted with responsibility didn't receive full understanding first. They received steadiness. Noah didn't understand the flood when he started building. Joseph didn't understand power when he was imprisoned. Esther didn't understand deliverance when she felt the risk. What they had was readiness, an inner posture shaped long before the moment demanded it. This is why this stage feels sobering. There's less appetite for distraction, less tolerance for wasted energy, less interest in being right, and more concern with being grounded. That's not withdrawal from life, it's refinement of focus. When readiness forms, the soul begins conserving energy for what matters. Another sign you're here is how seriously you take your inner world. What you allow to shape your thoughts. What you consume. What you repeat internally. Scripture consistently links readiness with watchfulness. Not fear-based alertness, but intentional attention. Watching what forms you. Watching what influences you. Watching what quietly pulls you off alignment. This stage can feel lonely, not because you're isolated, but because you're less willing to pretend. Small talk feels thinner. Surface-level certainty feels hollow. You don't need to argue, you simply feel less at home in what no longer resonates. Scripture never portrays this as arrogance. It portrays it as maturity. You might also notice that patience is being tested more than courage. Waiting without explanation. Continuing without applause. staying faithful without confirmation. Readiness is built there. Not in dramatic action, but in quiet consistency. If this resonates, you may feel a subtle but firm resolve forming beneath the unrest. Not excitement. Not confidence. Resolve. The sense that whatever comes next, you don't want to meet it unprepared. That resolve doesn't demand answers. It demands alignment. Because once readiness takes root, the unrest changes again. It stops feeling like tension alone and starts feeling like positioning. And positioning is where the journey moves from internal preparation toward visible consequence. When readiness settles in, positioning begins quietly. Not with announcements. Not with dramatic decisions. But with subtle shifts in loyalty, attention, and trust. Scripture treats positioning as one of the most decisive stages, because it determines how someone will respond when clarity finally arrives. Long before outcomes are visible, alignment is already choosing a direction beneath the surface. This is where neutrality starts to feel exhausting. Not because you're being pressured by the world, but because internally you know you can't remain undefined. You may still be unsure of specifics, but you're no longer unsure that something is being asked of you. That awareness doesn't shout. It presses. It invites honesty over avoidance. The Bible consistently shows that positioning happens before revelation. People choose what they will stand on before they see what they will face. That's why Scripture places so much weight on the heart in seasons like this. Not beliefs you can recite, but commitments you live by. What you protect. What you excuse. What you refuse to let go of. You may notice that your reactions are changing. Situations that once triggered frustration now prompt reflection. Temptations that once felt harmless now feel misaligned. This isn't moral anxiety. It's discernment refining itself. Positioning doesn't make you rigid. It makes you intentional. This stage often brings internal friction, because old habits resist being released. Old identities argue for preservation. Comfort pleads its case. Scripture never shames that resistance. It simply reveals it. Resistance isn't failure, it's information. It shows what still holds weight in your life and what may need to be surrendered gradually, not violently. Another sign of positioning is how clearly you begin to sense what steadies you versus what drains you. Some conversations leave you grounded. Others leave you scattered. Some content strengthens clarity. Others blur it. This awareness isn't about control. It's about stewardship of the inner life. Scripture treats this stewardship as preparation, not restriction. You may also find yourself less interested in convincing others and more committed to consistency. Not because you've disengaged, but because you've recognized that alignment speaks louder than explanation. In the Bible, those who were positioned early rarely announced it. Their posture became evident when pressure arrived. This is also where humility deepens. Positioning isn't about being right ahead of time. It's about being faithful before outcomes are known. That humility protects discernment from turning into pride. Awareness without humility hardens. Awareness with humility stabilizes. If this resonates, you might feel both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because things are simplifying. Heavier because responsibility is becoming real. That combination is not confusion, it's commitment forming. And as positioning becomes internal reality, something else begins to shift. The unrest that once felt personal starts intersecting with a larger pattern. You realize this isn't only about you. It's about a moment, a season, and a convergence much bigger than individual experience. When positioning settles internally, perspective changes. You start seeing your experience not as an isolated struggle, but as part of a wider movement of awareness. What once felt personal now feels timely. Scripture shows that this is the stage where individual discernment begins to intersect with collective stirring. You realize you're not alone in sensing this shift. You're simply early in recognizing it. This is often when people notice the same themes appearing everywhere. Conversations you didn't start echoing your thoughts. Questions you thought were private surfacing publicly. Words like awakening, discernment, truth, calling showing up across cultures and belief systems. That overlap isn't coincidence. It's synchronization. And Scripture treats synchronization as a sign that a season is advancing. At this stage, the unrest changes texture again. It no longer feels like tension pushing you forward, but like clarity pulling you inward. You're less reactive to news, less shaken by opinions, less desperate for reassurance. Not because things are suddenly calm, but because you've found footing. Discernment has given you orientation even without full answers. This is also where patience becomes essential. Scripture warns that recognizing the moment doesn't mean rushing ahead of it. Those who perceive seasons early are not called to urgency in action, but steadiness in posture. Watching without panic. Waiting without disengagement. Staying grounded while others are still trying to explain away what they feel. You may notice that your sense of time feels different now. Less rushed, yet more serious. You're not scrambling, but you're also not drifting. There's an internal alertness, not fear-based, but intentional. The Bible often describes this as being awake. Not anxious. Awake. Another marker of this stage is how you respond to pressure. Instead of collapsing inward or lashing outward, you become more centered. Less interested in proving anything. More interested in staying aligned. That calm isn't denial, it's discernment matured enough to hold weight. This is also where humility protects clarity. You don't feel the need to label yourself or explain what you see. You're content to let understanding deepen quietly. Scripture shows that those who truly discern timing don't announce it loudly, they live differently under it. If this resonates, you may sense a quiet confidence forming beneath the unrest. Not certainty about outcomes, but trust in orientation. You don't know exactly what comes next, but you know how you want to meet it. Grounded, attentive, faithful. And this is where the journey approaches its turning point. Because once perspective shifts and clarity stabilizes, the final question begins to surface, not about what is happening in the world, but about how you will respond when this season moves from awareness into consequence. If you've stayed with this message all the way to this point, it's because something here reached you. Not everyone listens this far. Not everyone stays present through a conversation like this. So if you felt something while watching, that quiet recognition, that sense of clarity, that inner, "This is speaking to me," don't ignore it. Subscribe to the channel now. This space is for people who are paying attention. For those who sense that what they're feeling isn't random, and who want understanding instead of dismissal. Subscribing isn't just about future videos, it's about staying connected to a journey of discernment, depth, and spiritual clarity for moments like this. Now I want you to do something specific. Go to the comments and type exactly this: "I am aligned." Type it if this message resonated. Type it if you realize that what you've been feeling isn't anxiety, but awareness. Type it if you're choosing to listen instead of silence what your heart is sensing. Your comment isn't just interaction, it's a declaration. It helps anchor what you've recognized and lets others know they're not alone in this experience. And before you leave a like on this video. It may seem small, but it tells the algorithm to carry this message to others who are quietly wrestling with the same unrest, wondering if there's something wrong with them, when in reality, something deeper is awakening. Don't stop here. The next video is on your screen right now. It goes even deeper into what this inner stirring is preparing you for and how to remain grounded as this season continues to unfold. Click it now. Because once you understand what this unrest really is, you can't unsee it.